The hard part about selling yourself as a life coach or a business coach, nobody wants to admit that they need a coach. Leadership coaching is like taboo these days, right? No one's gonna raise their hand and say, yeah, I need leadership coaching, as a small business owner or even a CEO of a company. And so the ability to provide people with clarity and purpose again, and then deep diving into business on how to create systems and strategies to help all that. And so that was the birth of Lead Forward Strategies. My name is Jeff. I am a West Point graduate, combat veteran, and corporate success story that took all of that and turned that into my own business called Lead Forward Strategies. Lead Forward Strategies is a business that went through a couple of different phases of the business. The business now focuses on coaching and consulting, focusing really on the mindset part of businesses, helping entrepreneurs, helping small business owners, helping people scale their businesses with the overall theme of focusing on clarity, systems, and purpose.
So first of all, I would like to start this conversation by saying thank you for your service. As we were saying beforehand, I have the highest respect for our veterans, and I really appreciate the fact that you serve. So thank you. Going forward on that, you really run the gamut on your resume. You have quite the resume. Like you said, Long Island, you grew up on Long Island.
Yes.
West Point graduate. Then you were also an author. You didn't mention that, and I started reading your book. So you have an interesting story, actually an incredible story of like your self-reflection is incredibly impressive, and how you look back on your life and see this is why I did a lot of the decisions that I made. And I found it really fascinating, and I appreciate that and admire that. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. The overall theme of my life has been service and service to others. A big part of service to others also led me towards a place of, while serving others, falling into a trap of constantly seeking external validation. And while seeking that external validation, I kind of lost the identity of myself and who I truly was in my core. Constantly seeking the approval of others, constantly, working as hard as I could to be the best that I could be, but always with others in the mindset. And I really lost myself in that. I lost that version of self. And so, I am blessed to say that I do now have a best-selling book on Amazon that is a life memoir capturing that. I've had a lot of people tell me, Jeff, you have an amazing story. You should write a book one day. And in that process, you're like, everybody has a story. What's so special about mine that people would want to read about it? But I thought more about it, and I kind of decided to put pen to paper and really start to write some stuff out. And the therapy in that was unbelievable. Just really starting to hash out what each chapter of my life looked like. To what everybody on the outside looking in would call such a success story, where each phase of my life kind of had a void in it, where I was really searching for answers without knowing I was searching for answers, but just constantly living with a void and trying to fill that void with external validations or compliments of others and all those other things. So while writing the book, very therapeutic, putting all these thoughts and all these things on. Blessed to say that worked with a publisher, game-changing publishing company, where the book was picked up, and they were like, "Man, you have a great story here. This is a story that it's not going to sell as a story about yourself. It's going to speak to people as a mirror, as a reflection." And that's what I really ultimately wanted to try to get across in the book. This was not a story about another combat veteran. This was not a story about another corporate success story. This was an opportunity for people to look and self-reflect themselves while reading the story and see how it aligned with them as well. Like, man, that sounds familiar. Maybe not the combat veteran thing, but hey, I was in a situation once in my life and that resonates with me. And so the continuation of, the book was kind of the life's journey to this point, of every single one of those chapters getting me to where I was. I'm blessed to say I feel like I lived many different lifetimes already in a short time, and each one of those have a big part of a story. And I think it's a real opportunity for people to look and self-reflect and use this as a mirror for themselves, because we're all human, right? And so while my story is my story and your story is your story, we're all human and we're all living this human experience. It's all very similar, right? It's all the same things, just different, right? But we can all draw the same conclusions, and use different things to help each other. And the themes are always the same, right? The themes are wearing a mask, right? Wearing a mask to try to seek the approval of others. Kind of, what I call in the book and talk a lot about in my book about wearing the armor, right? Who are we underneath the armor before we allowed, the external validation, society, everybody to kind of put on those layers for us, right? So as we start to chip away at those, who are we, right? It starts with that definition from within. Who are we when we really look from within? Not what's your name, not who your mom or dad said you are, not what your wife said you are, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your sister, your brother, not what society tells you you are. Who are you when nobody's looking at your truest form? And do you know who that is? And can you evaluate that? And so a lot of that came to this theory of alignment, of being, what I call, and, one of the great books that I read, The Four Agreements, talk about being impeccable with your word, right? Impeccable with your word being essentially words are who we want to be, actions are who we are. And how well do we align our words and our actions? It's really easy for people to write an email, right? And lead through an email, or write a really like great text message. Words sound fantastic, but what are your actions and are you aligned with them? And so all of that kind of brought me on this journey into the concept of, well, I've always had corporate success. While I was always checking all the box and feeling a little bit of that void, I always felt this deeper calling to help people in a way of looking around. And, as I evolved myself and kind of had some moments myself of that inward journey and really being able to start defining how to chip away at that armor and really find my purpose again and find clarity in my mission, I saw what a calling there would be to help others do that. And so, my whole business started actually as a franchise consulting business. So I actually started business as Costa Franchise Consulting, where I thought it would be powerful to help people get into business ownership themselves and help people in regards to the concept of going into business for yourself, but not by yourself, right? The franchise concept. And so for people that kind of felt that fear of going into business themselves, I really enjoyed that consulting work. And so that was the start of my very first business. Now, while I was doing that, I realized that I was actually kind of coach, mentoring, and teaching people a lot more about, business ownership or anything else. I was helping them in kind of clarity and purpose of their life. The hard part about selling yourself as a life coach or a business coach, nobody wants to admit that they need a coach. Leadership coaching is like taboo these days, right? No one's going to raise their hand and say, yeah, I need leadership coaching, as a small business owner or even a CEO of a company, right? They're not going to raise their hand and say, yeah, I actually can use some leadership coaching, or business coaching, or things like that. But everyone kind of, finds like, yeah, I've maybe lost a little bit of my purpose. I've lost the alignment. I've lost the ability to be impeccable with my word. That resonates with me, and I'd like to talk more about that, right? And so the ability to provide people with clarity and purpose again, and then deep diving into business on how to, create systems and strategies to help all that. But the biggest part of that is the alignment again, personally and professionally. So while I'm working Costa Franchise Consulting and I'm doing all this, now I'm working on my book, right? And I'm writing my book and I'm having all these kind of moments in the book. And I'm thinking to myself, I would love to use my book as an opportunity to at some point get on speaking platforms and stages, right? And so I'm thinking if I come off a speaking platform and I'm talking to people and they're like, man, your message really resonated with me. I really can use some help getting there. Can I buy a franchise from you? Right? Like, I don't think that was going to be the conversation. Right? And so that was the birth of Lead Forward Strategies. So conceptually, I moved, where I'm always going to have my certifications and everything that I did with the franchise consulting role. It's always going to be there. I shifted the business to lead forward strategies, right? That mindset, that coaching, that philosophy of leading forward, right? And really, it's so much more of the mindset part of the business, right? Where so many people are just showing up 9 to 5, right? They're doing the, whatever they need to do to take home a paycheck. But what's the purpose in what they're doing and how do they define success? Right? What does that really look like for them? Is it monetary? Is it family values? All these different things. And so, as I develop lead forward strategies, I've developed 3 different platforms off of that. So, from lead forward strategies, using a big part of my business corporate background in the building supply industry, I developed lead forward builders framework where I was coaching and consulting contractors and construction companies, small businesses, veteran owned businesses, all on that platform. But the niche and the real thing that I was working on there is helping contractors and construction companies, the same thing, getting into that mindset, right? If you're owner operator on a job site, if you have a hammer and nail every day, you're not the owner of the company, right? You are working on your company, right? Or you are working in your company. You're not working on your company. If you're the guy, owner operator, hammering a nail, who's forecasting for the next quarter? Who's looking at your onboarding and the consistencies and strategies of how to onboard new employees? Who's recruiting new talent? Who's doing all those things for your business? You have to get out of that owner operator mindset if you want to scale your business to be a successful business owner. You started the business to grow freedom, right? Now define what freedom looks like for you. But if you're on the job every single day, right? And this is for any business. If you're owner operator thinking that you have to be the one doing it all because it's my business and I'm the only one who cares about it, you're never going to scale your business. And then again, where's our purpose in that? Where's our priorities in that? What does success truly look like? And so with that, the getting them into that CEO mindset, right? I'm the CEO of an organization. You're not a construction company owner. You're not a contractor. You're the CEO of your company, right? That's a mindset shift. And then in that mindset shift, we start to work on all those different things in regards to purpose, clarity, and strategies. So while I have lead forward builders framework and I'm working with construction companies and contractors, that then kind of, became, I had homeowners now reaching out to me. And I had homeowners calling me saying like, hey, I see your content. I see some of the things that you're doing. You must know the good contractors. I've been burnt a few times. I want work done on my home. Can you recommend contractors to me? Now we have lead forward home solutions. Now I'm working as an advisor with homeowners. And now I work with homeowners also, where I work with them on what they need done for their homes. No project too big, no small or too small, any trade that they need. I have relationships here on Long Island for 15 plus years in the construction industry, from roofers to siders to HVAC systems to everything. And homeowners are scared to deal with contractors sometimes, or they're going out and they're getting 3 or 4 bids and picking the lowest bid and getting burnt on the lowest bid, right? And so now here I am working with homeowners, understanding the scope of their job, having conversations with them, making sure I have all the necessary information, and now I'm partnering them up with the right contractors or the right trades, people I know who done it well. I have way too many stories of homeowners, 10, 15, $20,000 down payments handed to somebody, cash, walked away, never saw them again, or walked away in the middle of the job, never to see them again. And it's heartbreaking. So another part of my business now where it's a business, right? I'm doing work for people, but at the end of the day, it's the same concept of helping people, right? Bringing clarity and bringing purpose back to what they're doing. And another part of the business, and the one I actually enjoy the most, is I do a lot of coaching on the side. So I coach equine therapy. I've found 3 years ago, I found the Warrior Ranch. And this was kind of when I was in a darker part of my life. And I knew, again, there was kind of something missing. There was that void. I needed something. And I did a simple Google search of horses and veterans. And the Warrior Ranch out in Calverton popped up. And I filled out their online submission. And within hours, I was reached out to by the backbone of that whole organization. Her name's Juliet Hackett. And Juliet reached out to me. She told me what the program was out there. She told me everything it was about. And I started going out there for equine therapy with veterans and first responders. And the mission and the focus of the Warrior Ranch is America's icons and America's heroes rescuing America's icons and America's heroes, right? So the horse as the foundation of our, kind of country with the background of that. And so America's icons and, veterans, first responders being the American heroes, just our abilities to continue to, kind of help each other in this world of equine therapy. And so I've been out there for 3 years, and that program has meant so much to me, and it's been such a big part of my life. I've grown into a coaching role out there. And so I see the effects, again, of bringing purpose and bringing clarity into kind of people's lives and what that can look like. The power of, that mindset shift of when we really stop and work with people in that. Also coach girls lacrosse. And so now I coach girls lacrosse. I've coached at Shore and Wading River for years, 10 plus years. I also coach for a very competitive travel club team called Legacy. And, I coach my own daughter in that, which is such a blessing to be able to coach my daughter while I'm doing that. She's 14 going into her freshman year. So I coach that year group. And so with all this coaching on the side, and again, the overall theme of helping, clarity, purpose, they're built from lead forward strategies. My third segment of the business, lead from within. And that's my favorite part of the business. It's a holistic mindset coaching for the youth, right? And so what stemmed from that was the thought process of how many opportunities there are for us as adults and children, and even more so now than ever with the youth, for the physical application for their skills, right? We put our children into these competitive sports at the youngest age, right? Some of these sports programs start in kindergarten, right? And we're putting them right into it. And before you know it, you're getting talked to about, hey, they could use, strength and conditioning training. They can use skill training. I'm doing one-on-one clinics over here. All these things to work on their skills, on the physical aspect of the sport, or, the physical aspect, of whatever they're doing. What are we doing for the youth for the mindset part of it, right? Like, why do we wait until, the older years when we're like, man, maybe I should see a therapist, like I got a lot of stuff going on up here, or, maybe I should seek conversation with others or something because I just have a lot of things going on. Why aren't we giving that and empowering the youth with some of that, right? So I came up with a program that I help the youth with, and I meet with them, sometimes at public libraries or whatever it is, and we have a kind of mindset, confidence, empowerment side of this clarity and purpose for youth and all these things. And so, from Costa Franchise Consulting to blossoming in through my book and everything else into the concept of lead forward strategies, lead forward builders framework, lead forward home solutions, and lead from within. I mean, this has just been such an amazing opportunity to find where I could place myself in a world to just get back to the roots of helping people with purpose, clarity, and strategies.
It's remarkable, and the thread I'm hearing through that is the opportunity to serve, or looking to serve, and continuing to serve, whether this be the youth, whether it be homeowners, or whether it be builders, or originally just business owners,
Yes.
is the thread of service. One of the questions I'd like to talk about is you mentioned you felt the void through a lot of your life, and you're filling that void. What was the turning point, and what was the, as I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it in the podcast. I mentioned it before in the podcast, definitely, that I had started reading your book, but I haven't gotten to the point yet where you had the turning point, the realization that things needed to change. What was that in your life?
So the turning point for me of when I realized how much of a void that I had and all the things that I was seeking that came not from within, but from the exterior or the outside. Um, 2013, 2014, it's almost all like a blur at this point in my life, right? Somewhere in that chapter in my life. When I was 2, 3 years old, my father took his life. And up until I was 13 years old, my mother always told me and my older brother that my father passed away from a brain aneurysm. And so that story really stuck with me, right? And so every time I was a young athlete, every time I got hit in the head or I had a headache, I was like, man, am I gonna have a brain aneurysm? Am I gonna bleed out in my sleep? It was my 13th birthday that my mom sat me and my older brother down and said, hey, I think you're now old enough to know the truth. Your dad took his life. And so my dad was a very successful man, as far as I was told, right? But as everything I knew, he was like a regional vice president of Pepsi. We were born and raised on Long Island, but for a short time, we were actually relocated to North Carolina for one of his job promotions. But it was in that time that he had his decline. And so within a few short months, we brought him back home. He was institutionalized for depression. Back then, this is, the mid 1980s. And so at some point, my father overdosed on his antidepressants and took his own life. And so that was a part of my life that I just never really ever addressed or ever really wanted to think about, talk about. Um, the one thing was if I ever walked into a room where people knew my father, they would come up to me and say, like, man, if your father could only see you now, you are like a spitting image of your father. Biggest difference is I was told my dad was over 6 foot and I'm like 5'7", so I don't think they meant the height, but a lot of it was about our energies, our presence, our look. We also had the same name, Geoffrey with a G. And so, um, that was, and I always got the same comments. You have no clue how much your father loved you. You have no clue how much your father adored you. And that's a hard concept to understand, right? Because I'm like, I don't know, because my dad took an exit strategy out pretty early, right? Like, if he loved me that much, he was the father of 2 young children, the husband, to his wife that he loved so much. If he loved all of us so much, why would he choose, that easy way out, right? And so that was a really, really hard concept for me to wrap my mind around. Fast forward years later, post combat deployment, post a lot of things going on in my life. Um, you know, I talk now heavily about clarity and purpose when I had absolutely none of that. The three biggest things I lacked in my life at the time we're talking of: clarity, purpose, and spirituality. I lost all three of those things somewhere between, combat, post combat, getting into corporate America. As now a father to 3 young children myself, and a husband to a wife, I had none of those three things, kind of wandering around, to the point where I went to the VA to kind of talk to them about that void, the depression, the just inability to kind of function in society. And at that time, the VA's common response was, "Oh, no problem. Here's Lexapro, right? Here's your antidepressant. That's all you need, right?" And every time I went back to them and said, "Hey, it's working. I don't feel as many highs and lows, but I just feel low all the way down here. I literally feel like a walking zombie in life. I just cannot function." They were like, "Okay, let's alter the dose a little bit. Let's add this, let's add that." And so the realization of everything just kind of hit. And so the turning point of understanding how much of a void there was that moment where, as I spoke about in my book, I'll never forget, as much of a fog of the story can be sometimes, I'll never forget the walk across my grass. I was living in a house in Shoreham at the time, and I was living on a dead end, and I was the last house of the dead end, and I literally walked across the grass, feeling every blade of grass on the bottom of my feet, and I walked into the middle of the street. And I looked up to the sky, and I spoke to my father for the first time. And I said, "Dad, I get it. It finally makes sense. You had two boys that you loved more than anything in the world, and you loved your wife more than anything in the world. But it wasn't enough. Nobody loved their three children more than I loved my three children. Nobody loved their children more than I loved my three children. But it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. The void was too big. The lack of purpose was too much. The inability to function in society was too much." And so I had that realization, and I put it into plan. And I wanted to be just like my dad. So I got my bottle of Lexapro, and I went back in the house, and I said my goodbyes to my children, and in my own way, and I got a hotel room, and I checked into a hotel room. So I wanted to be far away, from the house and the family. And I had a plan of what I was going to do in the hotel room. Just, I got a couple of bottles of Corona from the front desk. Then I was just going to, chug the Corona and take my pills, and just, I guess, very, very, very blessed and lucky that at that time, my wife, now my ex-wife, just knew. She knew I was off more than usual. Through all of our ups and downs, she still knew. She still really knew me at my core. And she called the cops and told them she feared for my safety, that I was not right. And so, the cops pinged my phone. They showed up to the hotel room. They entered the hotel room, and they took me. And that was, I would like to say, probably rock bottom, where now the corporate success story, the successful combat veteran, decorated combat veteran, the West Point graduate. At that point in my life, I was referenced so many times as Captain America. Now, here's Captain America in a hotel room being handcuffed by Suffolk County Police Department and escorted out of the hotel in handcuffs in front of everybody watching, and brought to Stony Brook Psych Ward for a 72-hour evaluation. And so that was the moment where I realized how big a void can be and how much clarity, purpose, and spirituality means in your life.
How did you start to fill that void?
So I started to fill that void by kind of phases of the operation in military language, right? And so phase one for me was getting back into community, realizing that I was isolating myself this whole time, right? Thinking that, I didn't fit into society anymore. I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have clarity. I didn't know who I was without the uniform anymore. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I was under the armor, right? And so phase one was getting back into community. And getting back into community for me, into the community, was getting into lacrosse coaching. finding something that I had a passion for in life and finding it again. And doing that now, not by, competing on the fields myself, but by leading youth onto the field and being able to coach, teach, and mentor them. And so that was phase one of the operation of towards my journey of filling the void. So phase one was getting back into community coaching, and that meant so much to me. Phase two was Warrior Ranch. So, the coaching was doing a lot for me. It was doing, fantastic, but it was still me serving others, which was very rewarding. But I still knew that there was work inward that I needed to do. While I was feeling joy from serving others, there was still work that needed to be done inward. And I found that at Warrior Ranch. And what a fantastic organization. So blessed that I found them. Eileen Shanahan, the president of Warrior Ranch, she has taken her vision that started in her kitchen of her house onto this land in Calverton, with these horses and these amazing volunteers and this whole, purpose driven, philosophy of helping veterans and first responders. And so blessed that I found that place. And that was the start of the journey within. And so the journey within of understanding, how you could be as big as you want, you could be as, as patriotic as you want, you could be whatever you want. Not going to move a four-legged animal the size of a horse that the horse doesn't want to itself, right? And so the other beautiful part of the equine therapy is the horse is a mirror of our emotions. If you walk up to the horse feeling anxious or with anxiety, that horse immediately will show you signs of being a little skittish, right? Its head will come up, its ears will go back. It's kind of like you can just see the nervous energy of the horse, right? If you approach the horse with a calm sense of energy, like, hey, I'm here to lead you and we're going to do this together, you can feel the energy of the horse drop. So much that the horses sync their heartbeats with us, right? I mean, it's scientifically proven, and how incredible is that, right? And so that was like a big part of the inner work. So now I was back to community, serving others in a positive way that kind of brought me out of isolation. Now I was at the Warrior Ranch working on like the inward journey of understanding the philosophies of all these different, traits of working with horses and the power of it. The third and final thing that really changed everything for me, while these first two phases were extremely important in my development, the one thing that I still didn't even realize that I was missing, that I came to learn what I was missing, was spirituality. I still, through combat, right? I was born and raised Catholic, right? I mean, I would have liked to told you I was, I even in coming back from combat and coming back home, I found this church to bring my family to. At that time, my ex-wife and I, we found a church that we wanted to go together with our children. I wanted to be the spiritual leader of my family, but didn't understand the concept yet of real spirituality or that connection because I wasn't right here. I wasn't right here. I didn't really even know what I was doing. I was doing it for others, not for myself. And so now fast forward, what does spirituality mean? How do I find that back, right? Not even knowing that I'm missing spirituality. I get a text from my ex-wife, Mexico, 5-MeO DMT, Bufo Olivares, all another language to me, right? So I'm like, man, what the heck is going on? So I call my ex-wife and she starts telling me this and explaining what she's texting me. And I was like, I thought someone stole your phone. Like, what is this? What is this stuff that you're texting me? The one thing that my ex-wife and I had very much in common is, maybe socially drank from time to time, a couple of social drinks. We never smoked weed. We never, did any drugs. We never did anything like that. To each his own, but it was never anything for us. So now she's telling me about psychedelics and Mexico and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, where are we going? This is not me. What are you talking about? And she told me about these few instances of, she went to go visit a family member in Colorado and she came across somebody who told her about this. Then, you know, she met somebody at her doorstep who was wearing an Army t-shirt, and she had a conversation, and she was like, man, do you mind if I ask? You're very calm and peaceful, you know, like, can you tell me more about how you got there post-military? And he shared the same exact story with him about this 5-MeO DMT and this stuff. So she reached out to me. She said, it can't be a coincidence. You need to look into this. I said, okay, you know, I'll do enough. You know, me and my ex-wife have a fantastic relationship. We are very, very blessed to have the friendship that we have after everything. And so at least I could do is look into it. And so I started researching, and I started researching, and I started researching. And my interest and curiosity was piqued. And so at some point in my research, I found a lot of different places, but I found this one place called Tandava. And Tandava is a retreat center kind of in the mountains of Mexico, this sovereign place, sovereign city called Tepoztlan, Mexico. And I talked to facilitators from up there, Joelle and Victoria, and they gave this amazing presentation about this 5-day healing retreat up in the mountains of Tepoztlan, Mexico. And it was 5 days of yoga, breathing exercises, mountain hiking, living off the land, Turkish saunas, hot tub, like all the, I was like, okay, well, I mean, sounds amazing besides the 5-MeO DMT aspect of it. That I still don't even know what the heck that is, right? And so I decided to go. And I reached out to some of my friends in my network, some of my other combat veteran friends, and some of my other West Point friends that have, you know, we've all kind of been through the same stuff. And I learned that kind of everybody was kind of finding their way in the world of healing aspects. And they said, you know, hey, Jeff, welcome to the conversation. You know, you kind of been on the island on yourself, you know, trying to figure this out, like, welcome. And so, but I also was told by some of them, you know, now I know more in the world of psychedelics, things like ayahuasca and all this other stuff. They said, Jeff, maybe you want to start with something else. Maybe you want to start with microdosing mushrooms or something. You don't even smoke weed. You never smoke weed, you know, like you're doing 5-MeO DMT. It's actually called the God molecule, right? So ayahuasca is called the spiritual molecule because it's a visionary experience. You visualize things, you see things. 5-MeO DMT is called the God molecule. It's a death process. You don't visualize anything. It's kind of a feeling of death, right? And the goal is to achieve the death of the ego, right? And so it's really, really, really hard to put to words into what it's like experiencing it because it simulates that kind of death experience, right? And it takes your consciousness into a whole different realm. So again, I was like, okay, you know, I don't know, you know, I mean, this is a whole different world. This is, you know, something I would never, ever entertain, right? You know, I've prided myself on, of all my issues, post-combat, post-military, everything, you know, limited alcohol, no drugs, no anything. What are psychedelics? You know, what are, you know, is that, am I now doing drugs? Am I like, what is this world, right? Now I'm, you know, very, very happy to see, hear, and process that, you know, the VA and other things are really, really looking into things like ibogaine, and they have been doing things like ketamine treatments. They have been incorporating psychedelics based off of proven success stories of what this has done for PTSD and depression and combat veterans and things like that.
I have to pause you really quick to
Please.
say that you're an incredible storyteller. Just because, like, I'm like you like leading me on. So I was like, whoa, like I want to know, I want to know, because it's.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's all I wanted to say is like,
Yeah.
you're telling the story, and I'm like, you drop these little breadcrumbs, and I'm like, what's the, how did we get here? And it's not like this, like, oh, it's rambling. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's really interesting, and oh, this and that. It's like, but like, it's. I just wanted to compliment.
Well,
you
I
on your
appreciate you saying that
storytelling.
because at some point I'm like, man, am I just, am
No,
I, am I going?
no,
Yeah. Am I rambling?
I want to know what happens.
Yeah.
Keep going, keep going. I was
Yeah.
just wanted to compliment.
No, I appreciate that. I actually really do appreciate you doing that because at some point here I'm like, man, am I just going?
No,
like,
I want to know.
or should I cut the sentence off and let him ask more
Yeah.
questions? Or
So tell me, so
Yeah.
you have the VA that is looking into more of these alternative treatments. But did you end up going, or was that
I did. So I ended up going to Poachland, and
which is the five
yeah, 5-MeO DMT.
MEOD
5-MeO.
MEO?
Yep, MEO
Okay, yeah,
DMT.
yeah. Okay,
Yep. And so DMT is kind of a bigger conversation these days. 5-MeO is just the declaration of the Bufo olivaris, the toad that it comes from, the secretion there that it comes from, which is kind of, creates the death process feeling of everything. And so I went and I had my experience. And again, without getting into grave detail of the actual ceremonies and the things there, the biggest takeaway for me was the actual process of taking 5-MeO DMT, the actual process of that spiritual journey is life changing in its own. It is unbelievable. Now, there is something very important called the integration process. The integration process is described as coming, the weeks coming after, right? So 5-MeO DMT and some of these psychedelics have a proven success story on the neuroplasticity of the brain, where they could actually kind of help rewire some things, right? And kind of that's where it helps with the PTSD and depression. However, the integration process is so important because the integration process is now what you do every day after that, right? How do you integrate it into your life? Because whether it's 5-MeO DMT or ibogaine or mountain hiking or whatever your thing of choice is, there's no magic pill for life. Nothing is going to, oh, I did this one time and it saved me, it changed me, it did all these things. Nothing is the one time be all, fix all, cure all. And if someone's telling you it is, it's BS.
it's an application
It's
process.
an application process. It's an application process, right? So now, once you've had that experience and you had this eye opening kind of experience, how do you integrate that into your life every day? And so for me, that's what the real success story has been. Being a former, military person who loves regiment and all these things, I've implemented these things into my life every single day that has brought me back to spirituality, that has brought my purpose back to something so much bigger than myself. And so waking up and doing ice plunges with my face into a bowl full of ice and then dumping it onto the back of my neck. Then going into guided meditations, then going into gratitude practices. Wherever I am, whether I'm in the car or somewhere, like I take time to do these activities every day that are revolved around gratitude, around understanding purpose, around understanding the service towards something bigger. And all of those things led me to opening up my business on the call to help people back to purpose, clarity, and systems to integrate into their lives that will help them much bigger than how much financially do you want to scale your business, right? Because we're going to define success and what that really looks like. Because success to me looks like being able to go to my children's graduation or my children's book reading thing when they're young in the middle of the morning at 10 a.m. when we typically can't because we're working, right? Or, being able to take those vacations without the stress. That's the definition of success, right? Those involved moments, the presence of life. How present can we be in life with our loved ones, with our children, with ourselves? Right? The greatest gift that we have is time, and how present can we be in that time?
I think that's an incredible definition of success, and I think that a lot of people would benefit from that definition because, like you said, I know a lot of, paraphrasing kind of what you said, but I know a lot of people that have a lot of money that aren't very happy.
Yes.
And as we've come to us at this point, like we know in society that these things don't necessarily, the money, the fame, all these things don't necessarily bring happiness, and we still sometimes chase it, and it's
Yes.
just a really hard facade to break.
Yes.
Um, But I think through people like you and companies like yours, you can help one person at a time to realize, like, to get out of that rat race cycle of like,
Yeah.
oh, if only I had more money, then I'd be happy. If only because the grass is always greener, and it's learning
Yes.
to some degree some sort of contentment.
And you are an amazing success story of that yourself, right? The YouTube success. You had the followers, you had the presence, the money was coming in, right? But was it filling your purpose? Was it making you happy?
It was
Right?
not, yeah,
It was becoming more and more of a job,
yeah,
right? And less of a purpose, right? And had it enough. So many people, like, I mean, I see it every day, right? You go to these businesses, and you observe and you see people just punching the card 9 to 5 every single day, and it's just like, and there's the few like yourself that are like, this isn't me.
mm,
And it's going to be a risk versus reward to take this leap and to kind of shift some things, but it's going to save my soul.
yeah,
And that's a heck of a lot more important, especially once you become a parent,
yeah,
right? You want to lead by example, right?
yeah,
And leading by example, I used to think leading by example meant working 16 hours a day. I mean, there was a phase of my life where I was cage fighting, right? And so I was working 14, 15 hours a day and then going to train in fight camps, for a cage fight, and I was not present in my children's life at all. So here I am talking about how much I love my children, but I had an extreme lack of presence in their lives, right? But I was making great money. I was doing good things, right? Is that success, as you said? So I mean, you saw it, you felt it, it. I mean, it's the calling,
yeah,
right? And sometimes it's just trying to, help. And look, not everybody's meant to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody's meant to leave their 9 to 5 and go out and start something special, right? But you can still help those people with their purpose, their clarity, and their direction,
yeah.
and really define what success looks like to them. If that's what they're still, what they're called to do and what they want to do, you can always help people kind of find their calling back to within.
Yeah. Well, you have an incredible story, and I highly recommend the audience take a listen to further more of your content, but also take a read of your book.
Thank you.
In conclusion, where can people find you and get connected with your business?
Yeah, sure. You can find me online, find me on social media platforms, on Instagram, LinkedIn, my websites, just leadforwardstrategies.com. I'd love to connect with people, in any way, shape, or form. And again, this is a calling towards something bigger. This is a calling more towards, is there something that's tangible out of this? Is there something that we can sell you out of this? This is people connecting with people, to for that higher calling of purpose,
Yeah.
of clarity, and how to connect.
Well, it was a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah,
Thank you for
dude.
sharing your story.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.